this morning, obviously, with Barclays announcing their main sponsorship of the WSL. How big a step is that for the women's game?
Well, I think the women's game's at a tipping point. I've been saying this for some time, that this year I felt would be the watershed moment, I think, where we would commercialise the game. And as we saw with the announcement at the Telegraph yesterday, that the investment into the recording of women's sport has reached a point where sponsors want to put their money into it, as well as TV companies wanting to show more football than ever. So for us, the concentration has been getting the product right, and I think the product is such that the best companies now want to work with the league, and I think that it should shine a light in departments within football clubs to say, well, if the league can do that, now it's up to football clubs to challenge their commercial teams to bring the same level of sponsors to their women's programme, and that for me is why it's such a significant step in the right direction.
We know from 25 years ago in the men's game that big sponsorship deal, TV or whatever, it brought in overseas players, the best of overseas talent. Do you see that being replicated in the women's game in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think the women's game will go very much in the same direction as the men's game, but as we're starting to see in the men's game too, that means a movement of players beyond British borders in the opposite direction. I think perhaps that's more commonplace in the women's game, where there'll be more British players playing overseas than there are in the men's game. And I expect that to continue, knowing that there are more and more professional clubs popping up all over the world. So the opportunities are there, and that the game in itself is becoming global. So, I think this is, I've said it before, this will be the best league, if it's not already the best league in the world. And I think today's announcement demonstrates that we've got the pulling power to bring the very best to our league, and importantly, put their money in the right places. And you tell me a league in the world in the women's game that can attract a sponsor like that with a level of investment. It's absolutely brilliant, and credit to them.
Going back to this morning's announcement, we seem to have cracked into the FA Cup final, getting huge crowds there. We saw a massive crowd in Spain this week, 60,000 people for Atletico Madrid, Barcelona. I know that was a bit of a one-off in the men's stadium, but what do you think we'd have to do here to grow the crowds for domestic league matches?
Ganar más dinero. Si quieres mucha gente ahí, necesitas más dinero. You got to spend money. Sorry. You've got to spend money. I read a fantastic piece about the amount of money they spend on marketing this morning. And we probably put the same level of investment into our FA Cup final that they did for that type of game. It's simple. People want to come, but they need to know consistently when it is, where it is, what time it is. It's still got to sort some of that crap out at times. So there's a regularity to it. But also the visibility is helping. When I'm looking at a cup semi-final and thinking, there's 2 games on television, albeit one on an iPlayer, one on BBC Two. With presence comes growth, comes interest. A World Cup gold medal would be nice, and I think it'll change it even further. And I think we have to be respectful that we're making unbelievable progress. I mean, it's moving so quickly. You almost don't want it to move too fast, because we need to be able to maintain everything around it. So I think the progressive build is the right approach, but I think this is the exciting point. This is the point I've waited for, the point where it's not a case of saying, can we get 65,000 in a ground? Yes, we can. I think we could do it for the FA Cup final. But we've got to turn 2,500 into 5,000. How do we do that part? Well, I think presence of sponsors and the fact that there's 5 or 6 cameras in the back of this room just shows where the game's going. So we just need to keep taking one step at a time.
Emma, you talked about a tipping point. By that, do you mean a move away from the women's game being seen perhaps as a bit of an add-on to the men's game? Do you mean it as being seen as a sport much more honoured in its own right?
Well, I've never viewed it as that anyway. So I just mean there had to come a point where somebody like Barclays would say, I'm invested in this for all the right reasons, not because it's an add-on of, let's say, I think about a TV rights just been given away on the back of an FA deal for the national team. That's no longer the case. But it might take us a little bit of time to undo some of that work from years ago. But I think you need somebody to go, I'll be the first. And that's what's happened today. Now, the challenge is with the clubs. If the league can find a title sponsor, then the club's commercial departments can find additional sponsors beyond what they have to support that growth. But what comes first, chicken or egg within all of that? Because if you don't have high enough attendances, are people going to invest? Not so sure. If you don't have regularity with broadcasting, well, then we can't get any quantity over the viewership. You know, who are your audience? We're just in the midst of trying to understand who they are, and there's differences around all that. And I think that today is a moment that says we'll take the lead, and I think everything around it is positioning itself to follow suit. And I think there's been a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes. I can certainly say that for our club, where it does take a little bit of time to get to that point. And I think we're just at that point now where I can see us coming over that hump and hopefully no longer be considered sort of an amateur sport or anything like that.
But you're saying the Barclays deal gives the clubs now credibility in terms of commercial negotiation?
No, I think what it says is that sponsors are willing to pay for women's sports. Sponsors are willing to invest. So you can't, you know, like I said, they're not ignorant. They know that the sport is continuing to grow, but they also know that it's a good opportunity, it's a good time, and it is a great time, I think, to invest in the women's game. And I expect we'll see more deals like that announced over the next year or two from around the women's football world, and I think that snowball effect will continue to have positive ramifications for the game.
How do you win that battle with clubs then? Does it feel like a battle to you?
No,
To invest commercially?
No, it's.
What do you have to do to
You have to identify what it is you need in its own right. You got to realise, if you know, for our club, I simply couldn't ask any more of the football club. But in order to try to make ground of years of it being an amateur sport, it takes time to position it, whether that's equally in your media channels, whether that's across your marketing platforms, that takes time and work. It doesn't just happen. Building relationships internally, building the right strategies. I mean, we have a CEO of this football club who's so committed to our team and growing that to a point where, if anything, we will become industry leaders, I think, in what we do with that behaviour. That now I think it's about the top people continuing to share best practice, which I think the owners do. And the next, I think for me, the next big moment is to find a broadcasting platform. Whether that's terrestrial TV, it's irrelevant. It's not about the money, it's about putting the game in a position where it's got regularity, it's got a slot, it's got the best exposures. And I think that's got to be the next big priority for the domestic game.
Liam and Tom.
Emma, touching on what you've been saying, is one of the important next steps finding an equivalent sponsorship deal for the Women's Championship so the top two tiers of the English game can continue to grow together?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's about treading on everybody else while you're doing it. I think there's always a perception that the top clubs want to do what no, they don't. I think we've got to create a trickle-down effect that sees clubs in the Championship. We've got to create buffers that if teams move up, they're given the support to do that, and if they fall backwards, they're given the support to survive. We're still very much in our infancy in being a professional game, and I think the fact that there's going to be a new process of decision making as well at the FA level, I think that's a game changer. You know, having the ability to have independents plus clubs involved with significant decision making as opposed to it going through the FA board, I think will start to create even more avenues. And Kelly Simmons is a fantastic appointment for the FA because she will I think she recognises that the sport for the championship is equally important.
In terms of the investment and the impact it will have on English teams in Europe, Oxford's been a winner for over a decade in the Champions League. Do you think it is financial the reason there hasn't been one, and this money will change that?
Look, the two French teams spend more than double what the top English teams do. So if this is about, usually the teams that spend the most in any competition compete the most. But the fact that our players have been professional, and our national team as well has been doing, and I think everything's gone into the game here, English teams are closer than ever. It doesn't matter how much money people get paid week in, week out. But what it does say is that I think the gap between, and I think I said this a couple of years ago, I said it maybe even a year, we still weren't there. I think we're closer than ever. I won't know until tomorrow night how close we really are. But I do think the gap has shrunk. And I think that regardless of who we play, I'm curious to see where we really are. And I'm certain that we have no fear, merely excitement to play these games. And I think anything can happen, absolutely anything, regardless of teams being more experienced than others. This is a knockout competition, as we've seen with the men's competition. You've got to have the belief.
I know you said, sorry, this was the tipping point moment.
Yeah.
If this is the tipping point, where do you see the women's game in 10 years?
Oh my God, I'm so excited. I am. I'm excited, and I work hard every day to make sure that when I rest up, I'm sitting there and say, I've done everything I can for women's sport, because the work that's been done in this country in the last 5 years should be celebrated. It really is. We are setting the tone, the trend, the way in the world. It was always been about America. Sorry, they lagged behind us. Yes, there may be a bit more equality in terms of the teams they have in their league, the support the players get, the interest in the game. It's growing. It's a snowball, and I can't see anybody getting in the way of England becoming the best place in the world to play football.
I was speaking to Kelly Simmons this morning. She was saying that one of her big goals for English women's football is for a club to win the Champions League. And as you just said, she was saying that the French teams have just poured a lot of money into it, but it is PSG against Lyon. And the fact that they don't have the structure and the density of the league that perhaps we have, it doesn't seem to make that much difference, because they've just thrown money at those teams. So what can you do as a manager, and what can Chelsea do as a club to kind of combat the fact that they've just chucked money at it?
Don't worry about that. I've got them. I'm coming for them tomorrow, and them lot in a couple of weeks if we get through. It starts with how you work every day. It's not rocket science. You want to become the best, you train the best, you behave the best, you believe like the best, and then what? You're just two humans standing across each other. And I know more than anything else we've been successful over the 5 years I've been here. Yes, domestically we haven't been brilliant this year, but we're in it, and I'm really, really looking forward to watching us play tomorrow with more experience than ever. And I think English football's time is coming, and I think the rest of Europe fear our country and our clubs, and they're quite right to do so.
Any more from anyone?
Can I just check on something that you were saying there? Do you really feel America's lagging behind English women's football?
Yeah. You tell me another country that's... I don't know how much Barclays have paid today, but wow. It's unbelievable. That is such a great news story for our country, and one that I'm sure America will look at and say, how do we keep pace with that? The best players are not going to America. They're staying in Europe, and in fact they're coming to England.